Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell. I'm at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm speaking with someone that I just actually saw at Matt's ranch in Rantanen Town in Southern California, Mauricio Rodriguez. Mauricio has been involved in network infrastructure planning and working on variety of projects like this with Native Tribe, and also has just been working in this space for some time. And so welcome, Mauricio.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and it was great seeing you over there at the ranch and really collaborating with everybody there. It's always a good event.
Yeah, we met years ago at a different tribal broadband boot camp, also at the ranch, which has changed quite a bit. But it was wonderful to have you back. And as we were talking, and as I was kind of looking at your resume, I was just reminded that, I think there's some interesting topics that we could talk about. So I want to talk a little bit about managing these projects. And I think, there might be some comments that are pretty specific to working on tribal lands. Other comments are pretty much going to be best practice for anyone, I think. So.
Absolutely. So specifically, for all these projects, I would say that it's important to have some patience, right? These projects aren't done overnight. So, I've noticed, and it was my case as well at the tribe, that these projects may start within like an IT department, right? But IT projects are very specific. I mean, they're sometimes complicated, sometimes lengthy. But remember, those are kind of indoors, right? You have a controlled environment. And we quickly learn that we're dealing with the public now, right? We're dealing with federal agencies. We're dealing with landowners. And that's a different conversation, a different way of approaching these projects that, IT folks may not be too familiar with. And, they've kind of had to learn to be patient with that process, learn about it, learn how to manage it, and work through it. So that's, what one observation I've had.
Wait, I want to, before you go on, I do want to ask you about this. So
go ahead.
It struck me recently, and then you just reminded me of it. For people who aren't in this business, I think there's an assumption that IT involves networking. And I feel like you said, it kind of does, like inside plant wiring could be related to that. And IT can be massive projects like electronic records. There's any number of things. Certainly, trying to keep malware and nosy attackers out of a network is obviously hard, complicated work. But I do feel like there is a divide between telecom and IT. And a lot of IT people really don't want to deal with telecom. And the telecom folks often have a grudge against IT folks, I think. I might be overstating it a little bit, but there's a divide.
I think that's a good general statement. I think we all try to get along, right? But I will say that, I started my career in IT and I thought, hey, it's a network. It's the same thing. No problem. I'll go now work at an ISP. And I found out very quickly that it's very different. Even the way that you think about projects, the way that you think about operating those projects after the fact, after they're implemented, it's very different. It's very different. Even some of the technologies are similar, but may not be used in the same way, or maybe some additional technologies that you didn't really work with in the network inside the building.
Right. So you were mentioning when you start dealing with telecom, I feel like you're starting to spiral into areas that you can avoid in IT more often. Dealing with the public, with permitting, and then federal agencies and things like that. But anyway, go back to where you were.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the steps, when you're working outside, right, working to build something that's either in the ground or above ground is land acquisition, right? You want to put up a tower to be able to provide either fixed broadband or have some land so you can put a shelter to house your network equipment to light up that fiber. You've got to work with the community to say, hey, where is it okay to have that? Is it aesthetically acceptable to have this shelter here, this tower here? That's really important, right? There's also zoning, right? And land use restrictions. You may talk to the community. They may say, hey, that's a great site. We're on board and everything. When you go to zoning, you find out, well, no, you can't build a tower there, or you can't put a shelter there, or you can't dig for fiber there because there's some kind of a restriction. You've got land lease agreements, right? You've got to have an agreement, a contract that says, yes, you may use that land and potentially pay a monthly fee for the use of that land. And then, it's what I think is great for the community projects is that you're working with the community to do something for the community. So I think that, landowners, maybe even zoning boards or land use boards may be a little bit more flexible with the community projects because they know that it's going to benefit directly those members of the community and even those that are even providing that land, which does happen. For example, in tribal areas, there may be an area that's ranch land or farmland, and the community member, the tribal member says, hey, this is a benefit for the community. I'll let the tribe use a little section of that land for the telecom project, and that works very well.
I think you've stated it in a summary way in some ways, and I don't know if you had to deal with this, but I imagine you can imagine a situation where you feel like, okay, at the beginning of a project, this will be a somewhat straightforward project. Okay, so I need to make sure that I have community consent. I'm going to announce these meetings. I'm going to advertise them ahead of time. I'm going to find the stakeholders and make sure they're aware of it. And then you go through that, and then you get to the point where like, all right, we've settled on this location. Only then you find out that like some people didn't pay attention to the first meeting, and they have a lot of power, and they wanted you to change the decision. And that's the sort of thing that I expect. That's where the messiness, I'm guessing, really starts to come in, right?
Yeah, this is true, and that did happen to us on many an occasion. And really, there an anecdote, right? There was one project, or one site, I should say, one site within the whole project where we had 2 years of different stakeholders and community review and everything else. And then, right when we were about to really contract out to have it built, it's discovered that there's a huge water main directly under where we're about to put a 60-foot deep hole for a tower. Or, hey, no, you know what? That area there actually is in a 10-year plan for a transportation project. We're not doing anything now, but in 6 years, we're going to break ground. And so you kind of have to think, well, okay, if I put something there and spend all that money and make the investment, well, in 6 years, I'm going to have to tear it down to make space for a roadway or whatever it is. So yeah, these things do come up sometimes late because people either don't pay attention or don't realize that there's a connection between those two projects, right? And that does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to sometimes assemble the ingredients for a recipe. So it's not surprising to me that someone's not thinking about what's going to happen in 6 years ahead.
Right. It's true.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the standards that you feel like would be that are helpful to like have people adhere to. So what kind of like environmental and historic preservation issues have you had to deal with? So, and I don't mean to say that like it's like an imposition. I mean, like it's a responsibility is what it comes down to.
It is absolutely. Especially working with tribes, right? Tribes, from one perspective, have a cultural and historic interest in preserving their ecosystems and their lands. And also, I mean, that's one way that they protect their sovereignty, right? Is to be able to say, we are stewards of the land that we have and we can protect it properly. So it's important for many communities to ensure that the environmental and historic requirements are met. So some challenges that we have specifically in Florida, probably not in desert states, but in wet states like ours, everything is wetlands, right? I mean, wherever you go, there is some kind of wetland ecosystem and you really can't disturb those, right? It's not appropriate to disturb those, and there are protections for those. And some areas, the land is just not stable enough, right? There's underground voids that may be filled with water or just an empty space that could end up being like a sinkhole, or so you really can't build there, right? So you really have to be careful about making sure that your environmental review is done correctly, your surveying is done correctly, so that when you build it, it's there for a long time, right? It's there for a long time.
One of the things that we talk about at the Tribal Broadband Boot Camps is based on experiences from Merit Network in Michigan, where they talked about when they initially were doing a massive project. They thought they would save time on the environmental review by narrowing it and only doing the environmental review for the areas they expected to be. And then they found that when they hit something that required them to change, they were suddenly leaving the constraints of the environmental review, and they learned. And now they do a very wide environmental review to make sure if they have to make an adjustment along their course, they would still be within that area of environmental review. So you don't have to stop everything and go back to review.
Yeah. And, we tried to do that, or we have tried in Florida to do that. It's easier in urban areas and suburban areas, right? They're already disturbed. It's pretty much known what's there. It's kind of a cursory review. out where we were building for the tribes, it's Everglades, right? It's technically not swamp, but we call it swamp, right? It's wild land out there. It's virgin land. It's difficult. I mean, there are narrow corridors of not wetlands and environmentally available areas. So you have to know where those are. GIS is super important for that, right? Getting all that information in maps and in drawings so you can look at these spaces and say, all right, I need to get from A to Z. What's my conduit or path to get through there, and really working to keep within that, right? Within some margin, right? You're not going to get a 2-foot clearance. You might get 20 feet and have to move within those 20 feet, but it's still a bit limited because of the environment. Yeah. And then of course there's the state historic preservation and tribal historic preservation. Those organizations will want to look around in the sites that you're building in to make sure that there aren't any kind of sites there or assets or activity or from previous activity that was at that site or even artifacts, and protect those. And those could, maybe later we'll talk about the challenges in construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll do their review, but during construction, you may dig and now find something that's there, either remains or artifacts. And that's a hard stop right there, right? You do not keep going. You call in those folks. Yeah.
And I was going to say, in some areas where they might be expecting that you could hit that sort of thing, they may actually have a monitor on site.
Absolutely.
At that point, if it's high likelihood, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are areas like that, like, if there are any cemeteries, I mean, even close by 100, 200 feet near a cemetery or any kind of a burial ground, they're going to want to be there just to make sure that those activities didn't extend outside of what they know. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we find is that you don't always know who you're dealing with and the contractors, right? You maybe know the contractor, you don't necessarily know the subs, you don't know who's going to be there that day. And so sometimes people do things either accidentally or intentionally inappropriate. You never know.
Yeah, you have to monitor. You have to monitor what's going on, as far as those construction activities. The contractors, they have a role, right? And at the end of the day, they're a business and they want to build it so that they get paid, right? So you do have to kind of trust but verify what they're up to.
It's helpful to have 20 years of experience to know the background of all of them. It's harder if you're newer.
It is harder. What I found is that those individuals working in the state historic preservation offices and the tribal historic offices are very knowledgeable about, those topics. Absolutely. I think we'll talk about maybe design criteria later and specifications and the standards. That's the other part of it, right? Where you, as an organization kind of running this kind of broadband project, you've got to have on the front end kind of a very specific description of what you want built. But then as it's being built, trust but verify. You've got to make sure that they're building it to your specification.
Yeah, I like to say that you mentioned those people in the offices might have that knowledge. It's always helpful to figure out who has what knowledge and then, grab a drink, happy hour. Absolutely. Or coffee. It's always good to have a relationship with people. Absolutely. To say, hey, I was thinking of working with this team. You got any background? And it's not necessarily like, are they terrible criminals? It could be do you have any tips of working with these folks? What are they like?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Good.
So before we get to standards, anything else? But we're going to move it to standards in a second.
There's so much that goes into the construction, the pre-construction and construction. I'll just mention a couple, like the federal clearances for towers, the FAA, right? The Federal Aviation Administration, and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They have some very specific processes that you have to follow to be able to be approved for a new tower site. And that varies depending on how tall the tower is, how close it is to an airport, that kind of thing. But the environmental reviews and what's called the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act review, is very important for that. It's a key aspect of getting those clearances easily.
Mm-hmm. And then there might be just others that you may not be aware of. When I talk with Travis about a friend he built across Minneapolis, I think he said at one point that he thinks he dealt with 32 different permitting authorities, got near the airport and suddenly he's dealing with the Air Force. And he's like, really? The Air Force?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. Once you start looking at what permits are needed or what clearances are needed, they tend to kind of pop up and crop up as, oh, by the way, don't forget this one. By the way, don't forget that one. If you're near a canal, or in our case, a canal, or maybe a dam or something, you might need the Army Corps of Engineers, right? These things do happen. But I would say, you know, a good way to handle that is to ensure that you work with individuals that have done this kind of work in the geographic area where you're doing the work, right? Don't bring in somebody from across the country, or, within the state is probably good enough. If possible, within your county or neighboring counties, because there are very specific things that are encountered in different areas. The desert versus Florida versus California versus, Maine, right? Very, very different environments.
And similarly, a telecom attorney is helpful. You might have a really good general attorney. A telecom attorney is pretty helpful.
Yes, yes, indeed. We've learned that as well. Of course, any organization has their internal business attorneys, things like contracts, agreements, and everything. Once you start working with the FCC, once you start looking at, all right, I want to become an internet provider, and how do I do that properly and have all the records required to be able to even bill customers, then you really do need an expert in those areas to guide you properly and put the right controls and governance in place to make that happen.
So there's a lot of steps that go into actually getting the projects, getting through them. One of the things that I feel like helps succeed as you're doing this is to have processes and standards. This is something that I've talked with the folks that were down at a Brownstone Consulting, who helped to build the FAR network in Texas, and in particular, Guillermo Aguiar. And he talked about just like having standards and like having a way that the organization does things. So what's been your experience along those lines?
Well, when you don't have standards, let's say that when you don't have standards, the contractors and engineers and whomever's involved in designing and building will do things however they feel is the right way, which may be okay. There's many ways to do things that are correct. But if you're doing a small project, if you're doing one site or one little build, it's probably okay. If you're trying to do that in scale, maybe a larger geographic area, multiple fiber builds, multiple areas where you're going to be providing service. Now you really want those standards. And, one of the big reasons is when you're operating this network, you want to be able to quickly understand if there's an issue with the network, a failure, a problem, and quickly have solutions for fixing that issue, right? If it's a fiber cut, let's say, you use the same fiber, the same kind of conduit, everything is exactly the same everywhere. So you have that in stock and you just say, okay, well, the people that we dispatch to fix that, just grab the supplies, go, and they know how to work with those materials. They know how to work with that fiber. And there are no surprises. There are no 5 different ways of doing things. There's that one way, and if you're starting from scratch, right, it's the best time to do that. Because I think what happens often is that networks and organizations grow organically, and maybe the first project was done one way and they learned from it, and the next project is done another way and they learn from that. And you end up with this kind of hodgepodge of different ways of doing things. So that's, I think, one long-term important reason for those standards. In the short term, you want to be able to clearly communicate to the engineers of record and the designers what you would like built. And that documentation also ends up going to the contractor and says, okay, you've got these plans, great, but here are more detailed specifications on how we want built, or how we want things built. The methods that you use to splice the fiber, the way we want those splice cases to look, right? Oh, excuse me. All those kinds of standards are important, so that when you go into the field and inspect, because it's important to go out and inspect and look at something and say, well, that's not the way we wanted it done. Well, they'll come back and say, well, we didn't know you wanted it done a different way. Why didn't you tell us? Well, no, we did tell you. We gave you the standards document. Now, what have we learned? They don't read it. They don't look at it. Right. So you go in the
this
field.
Seems like the classic band, or the Van Halen or someone, the classic band where they said that the contract where they wanted a bowl and they wanted full of M&Ms and all the green ones had to be removed.
Oh,
And
yeah. There you go.
that way, it was just a way for them to look, and when they got in there, to know if they read the contract and took it seriously or not.
Okay.
And so,
That's clever.
yeah, no, I've always loved that story. I mean, and for people to know, one of my favorite examples of this is you might tell the contractor, all right, we want in this area, we have miles and miles of fiber, and we want it all at 40 inches below ground. And if you have to come up within 20 inches of the surface, you can do that for 10 feet here or there.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
if you exceed this distance, then you need to come back to us for
Sure.
approval
Sure.
and all that. It's like those are the sorts of things that go into those documents.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and if you don't communicate that up front, it's not in, and really those standards become part of the contract. They become an exhibit on the contract. If you don't have that, you have nothing to stand on, right? Because you never told them you wanted it done that way. And you're not going to have much of leverage to basically have them go back and fix it at their cost, which is really
Right.
where, and then it becomes a little bit of a negotiation. You might look at it and go, okay, well, you didn't let us know, but it's okay the way you did it. But if they didn't, and it's really a big difference from what you need, you're going to have to ask them to redo it. They're going to push back and it's going to get contentious, and that's okay because that's what you asked them to do in the way that you wanted them to do it. And you're the customer. So I wouldn't be shy about that either, about, claiming when the things that are done aren't done properly and asking that they be done properly.
So in a Tribal Broadband Bootcamp booklet that we distribute, we have a link to the merits, terms, and conditions that they use. So it's a good place to start if people are interested. I can always share that around, but some of the different networks would share that with people if you're just getting started.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. I have a funny anecdote as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when you're building these tower sites, right? You want to get fiber to them, but in some areas it's difficult, right? Because of terrain, sometimes it's the time it's going to take. So sometimes you do what's called a point-to-point microwave link, right? A wireless link between the tower sites to get service to the next tower over.
Right.
Or,
Go ahead. Let me ask you, this is realistic. Yeah. Like, I feel like people don't understand time at all, and I'm not going to get into like Einstein here or anything, but if you're responsible for getting a project out, and like, let's just say you have to get through like one of those narrow corridors that are 20 feet long, like you said, you might only be able to do it certain times a year. You might have to be waiting for permitting. And in the meantime, you could get your tower up and you could and so if you're like, well, in 2 years, we'll have fiber there, but I need something before then, I'm going to set up microwave ahead of time. So there's a variety of reasons why you might do this as well to stage things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's the cost involved. There's the permitting, as you mentioned. Maybe, you don't have budget for, I don't know, somewhere around $300,000 a linear mile
right.
to build down that corridor. But for a lot less, you could get wireless. Pros and cons, right? One of the big pros is time.
Right. And it's really, it's pretty solid. At that point, for those kinds of links, it's not like your home Wi-Fi network where you wander a little bit around the house and you have worse signal, right? Like this is pretty solid stuff.
Yeah. They're pretty tall up, right? So they're kind of over all the tree canopy and over anything that would be in the way, right? And that's actually the anecdote. So how do you figure out that there's nothing in the way, right? Florida's flat. So we don't have mountains. We don't have anything, but we have lots of trees. Exactly. We have lots of trees and sometimes very dense wooded areas, right? So what did we opt for?
Also, I do feel like it's sort of like, oh, well, you just get up and look. Well, okay, there's actually this thing called the curvature of the earth. And so you don't know, exactly how far the further apart you go, the more that a 20-foot tree can get in the way of two 50-foot towers.
Correct. Yeah. So, if you're 10 miles in between, that curvature is going to, cause some difficulties. If you're maybe a mile or two, maybe not so much, but certainly the links we were looking at were like 15 miles, right? So the curvature issue was an issue. So, there's some maps and some surveying that you can do and records that you can look at, but what did we opt for? It's like, well, we're in 2025. Let's get a company to fly a drone between these two sites.
I was thinking that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, fly a drone between these two sites. They had, LiDAR and they had video and pictures and everything. And it was so high tech, right? So this guy went out there. He was flying, the drones between towers and taking great pictures and videos and all.
So you already had the towers at this point?
Yeah. So in this case, we had some towers, and in other cases, we knew where they were going to be, right? Because we were already far ahead on the permitting and the
Hmm.
clearances and the design. So we kind of knew where they were going to be already. So we said, all right, well, we need to make sure that we can get that microwave link between these two sites. Let's do the drone flight. Great data. This guy came in from the Carolinas, and we warned him, hey, this is not like the mountains in the Carolinas. This is the Everglades. You're going to encounter wildlife. Be careful, right? Be careful. And he was doing great. The last day, he was like focused on his, control panel thing and looking at the video and everything. And he didn't really wasn't aware of his surroundings. And when he looks over at one point, he was right next to him. There's a coral snake. I don't know
Oh, wow.
if you're familiar with those, but they're pretty venomous.
Yes.
They're one of the more venomous. And this guy freaked out. He ran to his car, locked himself in there, sent us pictures. It is funny now, but it wasn't funny at that point. But yeah, I mean, these things are things we encounter when we work out in the field, right? You just almost never know what you're going to encounter. And over time, you kind of become more familiar with your surroundings and become more aware of what you could encounter, and you're ready for it. But this guy was not ready for a coral snake to slither up to him.
No. I mean, I'm not a fan of snakes. I live in Minnesota, and we only have nice snakes around here.
Garden snakes of the garden variety, right?
Right. Yeah, no pythons, no super venomous ones.
We have pythons too, but those leave you alone.
Yeah, though that reminds me of you probably have that issue. I don't know, maybe less so, perhaps in the winter. It's the same thing. We did an event with Tohono O'odham, and they have the cabinets, and there's always that question then of if you're opening the cabinet up, what are you going to find inside? Because if it was cold in the desert, it's warm in the cabinet. So,
well, it's typically warm here in Florida, but yeah, our team that goes out there and works on kind of the smaller cabinets that are on the side of the road, they'll kind of knock on it, hit it with a stick, kick it a little bit, open it, and then a snake might pop out and slither away. One time when I first started in this outdoor job, I remember I was working IT inside data centers, right? And okay, now I'm outside. I said, oh, why is this generator cover open? Let me close the generator cover. It's like this close to me, right? I close it, and there's this huge hornet right in front of my face. And I said, all right, that's probably why nobody touched that, because they knew that if they touched that, there was going to be something there that wasn't nice. Nothing happened, but that was my first, real learning about, hey, when you're out there, kind of be careful with those things.
yeah, these are the things that I feel like when you're learning about the field, they don't always tell you.
They don't.
If you go out to drink afterwards, sometimes you'll get those stories.
Yeah.
So again,
and then you don't believe them.
Social time.
Yeah. And then you don't believe them. You're like, nah, that doesn't really happen.
Right. Is there anything else you've learned along the way that you'd want to share in terms of these projects and what people should think about as they're getting into them, or just having some compassion for those who are in them?
For sure. I've learned that there are some ways to make it better, like really partner with validated experts. And when I say validated, really get references, talk to their customers, get vendors that have worked on similar projects. For example, if they've built a data center somewhere, or they build data centers, and all of a sudden they say, oh yeah, but it's kind of the same thing as running fiber in the ground. It's not. So
Blinky lights and fiber, what's the big deal?
Exactly. So, get some references and make sure that they've done projects very similar or the same as what you're working on. Practical timelines too. So the community, your stakeholders are going to get very impatient if you overpromise and underdeliver. Right. So working with your experts, working with your vendors, having talked to the community, the regulatory agencies, really put a conservative plan in place. I think for the most part, the community networks may not be for profit, which is typically what drives these aggressive timelines is, the time to market to make money.
Right. Although often the nonprofits still have budgets to desperately try to keep.
You have budgets. You can't squander the budgets. And you've got to keep your vendors and contractors in check and keep them on the timeline, which is another reason to have that timeline. You establish that timeline. Like I like to say, you plan the work and then you work the plan. All right.
I like that.
But you have to have that plan. And it has to be realistic, right? Based on what experts tell you is necessary to, accomplish all those steps and milestones. And then, as you're doing the work, keep the community informed. Celebrate those wins, right? Hey, we got this done. Hey, we got that done. We're 30% in, 40% in. That keeps people interested, involved, motivated, fired on these great things that are coming. If you don't keep them in the loop, they'll kind of either forget about it or they'll think you've done nothing where you've been working on permitting for 2 years, right? That kind of thing. And I would say, look, every project has its challenges. Nothing goes perfectly. Don't take any of this as, oh my God, we're, launching rockets here into space. And we're not, right? We're building broadband networks. It's all terrestrial, right? It's all here, on the earth. It's been done so many times over. And I think, any motivated community leader can make this happen, right? Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it at all. And just make sure that you surround yourself with the right people that will guide you the right way and have an interest in ensuring that your project is a benefit to the community, is a benefit long-term to bring all those things that the community, that broadband can bring to the community.
Excellent. Well, Mauricio, thank you for your time once again. And we look forward to catching up with you at a future Tribal Broadband Bootcamp or perhaps somewhere else fun.
Excellent, Chris. Thanks so much.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at communitynetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@communitynetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Blue Sky. His handle's @SportsShotChris. Follow Community Network's stories on Blue Sky. The handle's @CommunityNets. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. Catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Artie Huseby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons.